Welcome everyone, and today I am chatting with Warwick Stacey of One Nation. Thank you so much for coming here and doing this with me. I'm very excited.
Janet, I really enjoyed the first one and I'm looking forward to this one.
Good. So the way it goes on, the rules of my podcast are there are no rules. You can talk about whatever you want, however long you want. And if there's a question you want me to ask or you want to talk about, we can talk about it. But I'll say, firstly, I just want to point out the fact that we've got a chess table here. I usually like to put something on the table, and I thought chess because I thought politics. Politics feels like a adult human version of the chess table, figuring out not the perfect way of doing things, but the best way with what we have available to us. We don't actually have to play because I actually can't remember how to play it too well.
Well, I think it's absolutely appropriate for politics because the back line, and particularly the king and queen, I would argue, are the government, and we, the people, are the pawns. And pawns are disposable. They have a use, but they're disposable. And I think that's exactly how the major parties look at us today. We are pawns that they push about on their board and to try and achieve their objectives. The bishop.
This is the bishop. This one? No, this is the bishop. Yes, the bishop. That's
one
one of the pawns. Yeah.
That's the pawn. Yes,
Yeah.
We're pawns.
So, as far as pawns go, I feel like the dumbest of them all because I don't really understand politics. I do know it affects us and greatly. It affects our day-to-day, a big picture, our future, our today, our food, our housing. I know it affects all of that. So my desire and effort is to talk to as many people as I can to try to understand how to vote and who to vote for. So not just that I can get everything I want, because I know I'm not going to get everything I want. I hope I don't get everything I want. I hope at least we can aim for a 60 to 70% happiness and success rate for our population, for Australians. So I really wanted to talk to you about what are you putting on the table for people? And if you can simplify it for me, like what is it that you're offering? What makes you different?
Well, I think, first of all, the reason why I've come into politics at my age, I should be retired. In a sense, I came out of retirement. I pulled on my Peter Pan suit and reinvigorated myself. And that is because there's been a complete lack of leadership in Australia, in government, over the last 18 years. So from 2007 through to 2025, I think there's been an utter failure of leadership where the leaders...
What have they done? What have they failed at? If you can put it in just everyday terms for us.
Well, bluntly, we went from a $20 billion surplus that John Howard bequeathed to Kevin Rudd to today a $1 trillion debt, which is now hanging around the necks of every Australian. It will have to be repaid. It can't be kicked into the future indefinitely, as governments have done for the last 18 years. So that was built up, dare I say, through Kevin Rudd initially, panicking during the global financial crisis. Now, a leader who panics is not a leader and should not be leading. And we've had just panic-stricken leaders over this last 18 months, so these last 18 years. So first of all, I'm looking for leadership, and I respect leadership. I look up to leadership. When I can't see it, and particularly in my country, then that's when I think there is something wrong. We are electing the wrong people. The parties are choosing the wrong people to be their leaders. So Kevin Rudd panicked and just hosed money against the wall.
In what way? Can you name a couple of ways that he...
Yeah, pink bats. Pink bats, for example. So it was make work projects in order to keep people working, in order to keep money churning around through the economy. 4 young men died. Rudd didn't even have the courage to go and see their parents and talk to their parents. They died doing installation of pink bats in various homes. So once it became government policy to fill every roof in Australia with pink bats for insulation purposes, which was going to conserve energy and save energy and so on, So there's always like an ulterior motive, if you like, or a supposed policy motive. Companies suddenly sprang up, and companies were now undertaking this. Of course, government is shoveling money into this. And as I said, 4 young men died, and Rudd didn't even have the courage to go and visit their parents. Then we had the Building the Schools revolution, which Julia Gillard continued. And again, there were reports of schools being given school halls that they didn't want, or school libraries that they didn't need, or other facilities. So instead of actually talking to the schools and saying, what do you actually need? It was, as I think has happened over the last 18 years, I will be corrected if anyone can correct me, but whenever there's been a major infrastructure project, it's either been, it's certainly mismanaged, it's not budgeted properly, there are overruns in time and in money, and in the end, it doesn't necessarily do what it said it would do on the tin. So again, it's just bad management. We had Malcolm Turnbull, so he's inflicted Snowy 2 on us, this hydroelectric scheme that was going to save our energy problems.
See, I love this because now you're giving actual names that people can look up and research. So this is very helpful.
Snowy 2, I think it's called. Snowy 2, that was going $2 billion. It's actually blown out to $12 billion. $12 billion. It's not finished. In fact, I think workers stopped on it. One of the drilling machines broke down. And no one knows how much it might cost if it were to be completed. And again, is it going to do what it's supposed to do? Probably not. And so these things are just, they're thought bubbles by I think, people who shouldn't be in leadership roles. To a certain extent, they might be claiming that they're looking ahead to the future, such as Turnbull might have been claiming. But in fact, again, cost overruns, time overruns, and it's not going to do what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
And then we went through, now, I think Morrison with COVID-19, panic. He was the elected Prime Minister of the country. He hid behind health bureaucrats. They were giddy with excitement, going on television every day, telling people to wear masks, to keep social distancing, not to go to the shops. Don't catch a football if it's kicked into the crowd being allowed for some reason at that time. And so these absurd rules and regulations. And you had premiers who were saying that they were following the advice, the best medical advice. They weren't telling us what that best medical advice was. And then you had this ad hoc national cabinet that doesn't exist. It's not part of the Constitution, but that was the Prime Minister and his advisors and the premiers. They would reach an agreement. The premiers would go back to the states, and then they would do their own thing. So there was no cohesion, there was no control, there was no discipline. And again, it was Morrison shoveling money through the door, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do. And now we've had Albanese for the last 3 years. And
that's gone really well.
Hasn't it? He said when he arrived, when he became Prime Minister, I'm here to change the country. I have no idea why Labor Prime Ministers seem to have this obsession. I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin Rudd said more or less the same thing when he became Prime Minister. So these Labor Prime Ministers come into office, they make these statements implying that there's something deeply wrong with Australia. I'm here to change it. He tried to change it with his ill-advised voice to Parliament. I think it was $50 billion to get that off the ground.
Wow.
And he lost that with a resounding victory for the no to the voice. And then I don't think he's ever recovered in terms of either authority or gravitas or whatever. And again, everything he touches just spoils. It goes rotten. And now we have this $1 trillion debt. And might I say, in the lead up to the election, I read just the other day that the Labor Party had put out $67 billion worth of sweeteners to the public. Now, I presume that's somewhere between, December last year and yesterday. But in budget night, they put out a further $34 billion of sweetness to the people. So that's $100 billion of promises, which is 10% of the $1 trillion that is our current debt, and that the generations coming after us are going to have to deal with.
Okay. So can I ask on that? Sorry to stop you, but so I've got this image of what you've said. John Howard came, he did what he did, and he handed over good financial situations for Australia to the next government. So we're in a really good place. And then since then till now, we are in like really deep debt. And you've mentioned some of the reasons. So here we are. What are you proposing? Like, give me flesh and bones to what are you proposing to help get us out of debt and to help us until we are completely out of debt?
Well,
because we're all struggling to buy food. We're all struggling to get a house. We're struggling with the medical system right now. Every time you go to a GP, most places are requiring to give money. Whereas before, I don't know. So I just like, what is going to help us? Because I'm struggling to move forward. I'm struggling to buy a car. I'm struggling to buy a house. I'm struggling to buy property. Whereas my parents and the last generation, they had less of a salary that I have, and they were able to do it and travel and take care of kids.
Yes, well, indeed. I mean, those of us who are old enough to remember back 25 years, and I'd say that probably our fellow Australian citizens under the age of 40 will not remember this, because 25 years ago they were 15 or younger. It was their parents who were paying the bills. But 25 years ago, people weren't sitting around the table worrying about their electricity prices, worrying about their the grocery prices, worrying about whether they could afford a mortgage or not, or worrying about whether they could find a desirable property to rent that was affordable. And what's happened in 25 years? In 25 years, it's completely reversed. And as you say, now people are having trouble putting food on the table. I understand there's this is a huge issue now in Australia. People are going hungry.
Yeah.
And finally, the food industry turned on Albanese just recently and told him the bare facts of life, that this is what was happening in Australia, and it was energy prices that were killing the food producers. And this was contributing to the cost of living crisis. So we weren't sitting around worrying about energy. Now energy prices have gone up. We have Bowen, who I think has lost his mind, who keeps telling us that the cheapest energy sources are solar and the windmills, the wind turbines, when in fact, and we have to keep rolling out more. Now, the rollout costs of that is what is causing these energy prices. I was talking to an elderly friend the other day. Interestingly, he told me he had an electricity bill from 1990, and it was around, it was $113. And I did a quick calculation and found out the present value of that $113 is $285. So that's what he would, that was the equivalent today. And his last bill at the same period of time, which was in September, so coming to the end of winter or going through winter, his last bill was over $700 last September. So, and he said there are only two people in his home. They are very frugal with their electricity is the only source of energy. They don't have gas. And for heating purposes, they used an electric heater only for a couple of hours at night over the winter. And so there he had a $700 plus electricity bill. And so this wasn't a problem. Getting a mortgage, wasn't a problem. And being able to service the debt, the mortgage wasn't a problem. Going to a GP now, my understanding is that the GPs have become employees of the government. So 50 years ago, GPs were self-employed, small businesses. Yes.
Wow.
Until Medicare, or an earlier version of Medicare, was introduced by Gough Whitlam in 1972. And then whatever's happened between then and now, GPs have become employees of the government. Now the GPs haven't had a pay rise I can't remember, 13 years or 15 years. Everybody else has got a pay rise. So as a result, in order to keep up with costs, and of course, running a practice, there are overheads, there are people they have to employ, there's electricity bills, rent on the property, and maintenance or whatever. And so they, in order to not only break even, but also to make a profit, they have to then charge alongside the Medicare rebate or the
Okay.
So that's why when you go to a GP today, and so again, I would say it's government interfering in the free market. They can't pick winners. They don't pick winners. They pick failures. And sorry, what this old friend of mine told me, his 1990 bill, there are only 2 electricity providers: the New South Wales government and I've forgotten who the other provider was. But today there is a huge number of electricity providers, and of course they've come into the market because of, dare I say, government interference, perhaps with the best of intentions, but of course with unintended consequences. And with this mad, insane rush to net zero, the absolutely insane rush to 82% renewables, the insane clinging to the failed Paris Agreement, we are going down the gurgler, and it's due to, you can blame it on the rollout. And sadly, Peter Dutton, now the Labor Party, Albanese, Bowen, they are continuing to do that. They are still pushing on ahead. And Dutton had the chance to come out and say, he was asked about if he were elected, would he get rid of net zero? Would he wind back the 82% renewables? What about the Paris Accord? He's going to continue with them all. So no choice, no difference.
What does net zero mean?
Net zero, it's
is there life at net zero?
Well, it means no carbon emissions at all under any circumstances. And it's impossible. Carbon is an essential building block of life. Carbon is essential for agriculture, for plants. It's plant food.
So if he gets to his promise of zero...
Well, carbon is produced... That's the other thing. 97% of the carbon in the atmosphere is produced by nature. Anthropogenic.
So maybe he wants to ruin that.
Well,
maybe that's his goal.
Well, I think they're doing well because they're covering Australia, the landscape and farming land, with solar panels and with wind turbines. And Albanese, when he speaks, honestly, he shoots from the lip. He was up in Queensland at the Townsville Bush Summit in August last year, and he was trying to convince sheep farmers that having solar panels all over their pastures and wind turbines, or certainly solar panels, was a good thing for them. And he said, not only does it make it cooler in the day, it makes it warmer at night, and it increases productivity. Now, none of this is explicable. It's a thought bubble that he throws out because he's the Prime Minister. He expects everybody to hang off every word and that every word is gospel. And in fact, it's just incoherent nonsense.
Why is he saying all this nonsense? Who is he saying it for?
Well, he's saying it for himself, and obviously he's hoping to convince people that he is Prime Minister and he should remain Prime Minister.
But why not convince people with something that has some sort of backing, some sort of, logic?
I think because they're in the grip of ideology. So they are beholden to the Greens. The Greens have proved themselves to be a hateful, hating, destructive force in Australian politics.
Isn't it funny that they're called the Greens and they're just ruining life and everything and nature?
Exactly. I mean, they started out as environmentalists, and I'm all for a healthy environment,
yes,
and a clean environment,
absolutely.
But I think somewhere along the way they've been subverted, and what we've seen of them over the last 18 months, 2 years, and then their crazed demands with regard to the environment and not using gas, not exporting coal. I mean, coal is probably our major export earner, along with gas.
So we're exporting it.
We're exporting coal to China and to the world. We have the cleanest coal in the world. We have thermal coal and we have coking coal. So one is for coal-fired power stations. The other is to create steel.
I've heard it said that China is getting rich and doing well and well because of our coal, but we are getting more and more in debt. How does that work?
Well, it works because of ideology. And so the Greens and parts of the Labour Party, most of the Labour Party, I think, want to phase out gas in Australia, gas use, and also coal use in Australia. Then they want to phase out gas, mining for gas, drilling for gas, and mining for coal. Now, we earn $70 billion with our liquid natural gas exports. That's now under threat. One of the biggest buyers, our biggest buyer from Japan, has just recently warned Australian gas producers that they are considering reviewing the contracts, the long-term contracts they have with Australia, and going elsewhere. And that is because they are not sure that the supply of gas will be constant and reliable. So because of industrial relations laws, because of the desire to stock gas production in Australia, and gas use, and then also because of the policy of the government to retain a certain amount of gas because we need it. So taking it, if you like, from I think from the export chunk that we're exporting to use back into the market. So it's just absurd government policy. It's contradictory, it's inconsistent, and it's impoverishing Australia.
Okay, well, tell me, if you get voted in, when you get voted in, what do you and One Nation propose? What are your policies to make our lives here better?
First of all, we're going to abolish net zero. Secondly, we're going to abolish the 82% renewable target. We're going to stop it. No more rollouts. What exists, we will keep and maintain because it's there. We're not destructive. It's being built. We would rather it hadn't been built. And then we are going to use coal-fired power stations. We're going to obviously keep those that we have at the moment operating because we need to. Victoria's already gone back to using brown coal and opening up its brown coal, which is a dirtier coal.
Wow.
It's brown coal-fired power station because they need to. So we are going to, that is going to absolutely reduce your electricity bills because we will be contributing to our own economy. We'll keep our coal miners in business. We will be using gas and making sure that it's used here. So that's another industry that is going to open and expand. And then we're also going to use high efficiency, low emission coal-fired power stations. I understand there are now zero emission coal-fired power capabilities. So again, technology will solve the problem. So that's the first thing we're going to do to bring down the cost of energy. We're going to put $40 billion back into the pockets of Australians, and we're going to do that by looking at the cost that we've got going at the moment. So this is going to help with housing. It's going to help. Taking 26 cents off a litre off petrol excise. And let me just have a quick look at my notes here. So the cost of living. So coming down through electricity prices, which you've already said we'll bring down. We're going to bring down the fuel excise. At the moment, there is a tax on alcohol in the clubs. So if you go to a pub or a club or a venue that sells alcohol, there is an alcohol tax on that. It's cheaper for you to go and buy alcohol from a bottle shop and bring it home and drink it here at home. But of course, what happens there? First of all, you're stopping the socialization that occurs in pubs and clubs and so on. So those venues are starting to shut up business because they no longer have customers. Customers are finding it too expensive to go and drink to go and socialize in a pub, in a club.
Why is there a tax on that?
Because the government is greedy. It taxes anything that moves, and it and then it wastes it. So,
wow.
I mean, there have been 6 tax rises on the cost of petrol since Albanese's been in government. We don't know this. The public doesn't know this.
No.
But it's just an automatic elevation that occurs in the petrol excise. So,
can I ask, do you propose or do you believe in less government and more of the state control? I don't know if I'm saying it right. Even like,
well, we certainly believe in small government.
Yeah, that's what I should have said. Small government,
and government should get out of the business of trying to pick business winners and being involved in the market and thinking it can answer every problem of every individual in the country, that it has the answer. And so one of the other things that we're going to do is we're going to save $90 billion from cutting government waste and duplication with the states. So, for example, the first thing that's going to go is the Climate Change Authority. It's a completely useless body. There's $30 billion of savings that will occur when that completely useless institution is eradicated. Matt Keane is going to have to go and get a proper job for the first time in his life. And so I'm looking forward to that occurring. I'm looking forward to seeing how Matt Keane goes when he comes off the public teat and has to get a proper job. The second thing we're going to abolish is the Federal Department of Education. Now, education is a state responsibility. And the Federal Department of Education, it doesn't own or build a single school in Australia. It doesn't employ a single teacher in Australia. It's a small army of bureaucrats who are living in buildings in Canberra, in perhaps in other states, just pushing paper around. It's completely unnecessary. The Department of Health and Aged Care, again, duplication with the states, completely unnecessary. And then Department of Housing. Housing is a state issue. So we have these federal government departments that are duplicating. In fact, they're not even duplicating because they're totally unnecessary, and they are basically sucking up funds that need to be used. We're then going to dismantle the federal arm of the Aboriginal industry. Again, those are state issues, and we're going to put money where it's needed. We're going to make sure, money goes where it's needed based on a needs basis as opposed to, if you like, a race basis. And again, that's about we've costed this is about $12.5 billion of savings.
Wow.
So overall, we will save $90 billion. It's been costed. We've done our sums. And I think we are the only party that's going to this election that is offering, certainly the two major parties are not saying they're going to cut money here or save money there. I saw the Labor Party said that they were going to save $1 billion somewhere. Now, $1 billion is small change to the government. Yeah. The way the Labor Party treats Australian taxpayers' money is criminal. $1 billion is nothing. As an example, the break clause, the cost of the break clause contract for the French submarines was around $150 million. So that was the sum of money that the Australian government owed to the French because we broke the contract. There was a break clause contract in it. So there's nothing perfidious about it, as Emmanuel Macron has claimed. It's reported 156 million, I think, was the sum that Australia needed to pay. Albanese paid the French $800 million plus, 850 or 860 million. Now, no one has said to him, why did you pay this? And I think it was purely so he could make friends with Macron. I think you might have seen the photographs of a beaming Macron telling he called Morrison a liar, I think, and a deceitful, deceptive partner. Those are my words, but that was the implication. And he certainly did. It was it certainly wasn't complimentary. But of course, there he is glad-handing Albanese, and Albanese can show the Australian people how good he is at mending damaged relations that were damaged by the previous government. Nothing to do with Albanese. But my question is, why did he pay over $700 million, more than a third of $1 billion that was necessary? And they treat particularly this Labor government, they treat Australian taxpayers as an inexhaustible source of funds, and they waste the money. So, one of the little headlines I saw recently with housing was Albanese's housing project, Future Housing Australia, or whatever it was called. The Greens weren't happy with it, and they wanted some changes. And so the little headline was, Albanese chucks another $10 billion on the table. It's a little bit like me chucking a couple of dollars on the table for you to go and buy us, 2 cups of coffee. This is how they treat taxpayers' funds, and they claim to be responsible government. They claim to deserve to have another term in government. It's incomprehensible.
Well, I've heard it. I've heard that allegedly he's been bought out. Do you think that's possible? That another country, like maybe China, has bought him out, and he's just doing what he can to deepen his pockets and help the people who bought him out? Is that possible?
Look, I haven't heard that, and I don't think it's the case. I think it might be unfair commentary.
Sure.
I'm certainly not here to defend Albanese, but I think if I have to, I will. And yeah, facts. I mean,
interesting. Yeah,
facts are what count.
Facts are what count. Yeah. So once you come into power and get that,
well, can I say?
Yeah.
One Nation is not going to form government.
He's not going to.
No, it's going to be either the Labor Party, propped up by the Greens, although Albanese has said he will not do a deal with the Greens, but keeping a promise has never been a problem, or breaking a promise rather has never been a problem for Albanese. He talks out of both sides of his mouth at the same time, depending on which audience he's talking to. And this, I mean, remember, my word is my bond. I think that there are countless examples where he has proved himself to be mendacious, deceptive, deceitful. And so he said he will not do a deal with the Greens.
Okay.
I don't believe him. If he needs to do a deal with the Greens to remain Prime Minister, he will do a deal with the Greens.
Yeah.
So we're either going to get Labor Party propped up by the Greens, because the experts are telling us it's going to be a minority government, whichever way it goes, or it's going to be a coalition government, perhaps propped up with the Teals. Now, what One Nation hopes, because we see ourselves as the only true Conservative party in Australia, if we receive enough votes and we have enough senators in the upper house and we have the balance of power, that's where we will not be in power, but will hold the balance of power. And that is where we will either put a complete chokehold on every divisive and destructive piece of legislation that the Labor Party and the Greens will try to push through the Senate. We will stop it. And if it's the coalition in power, then we will put political spine and political courage and political integrity into the coalition. And I hope Peter Dutton, if he becomes Prime Minister, becomes a strong and conservative Prime Minister. But having said that, he had his opportunity to stop the pain from electricity prices when he was asked about stopping net zero, about stopping 82% renewable target by 2030. It's an impossible target. And coming out of the failed Paris Agreement, none of the signatories are keeping to their promises, to their commitments, and yet he said no to all of it. So he is going to continue the pain. He won't continue the pain if One Nation holds the balance of power. We will hold him to account, and we will make sure that energy prices come down, that the cost of living crisis is ended, that immigration is stopped. I think he was even asked, would he stop immigration, the levels of immigration? I may be wrong in this, but my understanding is he said no. So how he could say that and expect to, what difference is there between the coalition and the Labor Party under those circumstances?
That seems exactly the same. What's it called? Two sides of the same coin. Can you talk a little bit about why immigration needs to be stopped or slowed down and what negative impact it's had on it. Because, as we say it to a layman like me, it sounds like, oh, immigration, it's a nice thing to do. People need to get away from their country. They want to come here. Like, why not have our, make that accessible to our country, accessible to other people? We don't have that much of a population as per our land mass. So can you talk a little bit about the impact of immigration and why you want to slow it down? Yeah.
Well, first of all, immigration is out of control. Now, I saw a minister, a Labour minister on television just the last couple of days, and he was asked about immigration, and he said, well, put a serious look on his face and said, yeah, no, we are trying to bring it down. As soon as he said that, I realized that they've lost control. He was he was admitting they don't have control. You're the minister and you can't stop it. You're trying to bring it down. Surely ministers are there to control their departments and to set the parameters of the spending or whatever that particular department, that particular ministry deals with. He was admitting, although I don't think he realized it, that they had no control over immigration. To say we are trying to bring it down when he's in the driving seat, your foot's on the accelerator, all you got to do is take it off and put it on the brake, and he was admitting that he couldn't do it. Wow. So my question to that point is, who is in control? Who is pulling the strings? And who is doing what they want to do as opposed to what the government supposedly wants to do? Yeah. Now, you mentioned people who want to come here because they want a better life. We don't owe the rest of the world anything in terms of providing open doors to people who want to escape to a better life. We signed the UN Refugee Convention back in the 50s, wherever it was, and we have abided by it. But the influx of supposed refugees that we've had certainly over the last 18 years, and certainly under Rudd and Gillard, when we had 50,000 illegal immigrants coming by boat from Indonesia, throwing their passports overboard, claiming refugee status, 1,200 drowned, and it cost over $10 billion to deal with the whole thing. Rudd was blaming it on push-pull factors for a civil war in Sri Lanka that had come to an end or was coming to an end. In other words, typical Labour ploy, blaming everything else outside forces instead of accepting responsibility. He said we couldn't stop the boats. Now, for heaven's sake, we've got a Royal Australian Navy that's supposed to stop boats if we're being invaded. And here we have a Prime Minister saying they couldn't stop a ragtag flotilla of illegal immigrants.
Wow. And
Tony Abbott stopped the boats. Tony Abbott put the lie to the claim by Kevin Rudd, telling the Australian people we had to suck this up. So first of all, we don't owe the rest of the world anything. John Howard famously said, we control who comes here and we control the means by which they come here. We signed that UN Refugee Convention. We are going, one nation will take us out of that because that is being gamed by illegal immigrants, by refugee organizations inside and outside the country. And and they are taking away our sovereignty, our control over who comes here and how they come here. Now, Australia has very much done the heavy lifting in terms of accepting refugees.
Yeah.
But we are going to take back control of that. Now, in terms of over the decade from 29 to 2019, about 260,000 immigrants, new arrivals, on average, annually came into Australia.
How much?
About 260,000.
260,000 annually?
Annually, yes.
Good God.
Well, they were controllable numbers. Now, I actually think they were a little bit high anyway. But the point I'm making that these were, if you like, legitimate.
No, I don't mind people coming. I'm just wondering, how can we afford it?
Well, but just wait. It gets better. In the last 3 years under Albanese, we've had more than around 500,000 a year come in. This is, again, we had a big gap during 2020 to 2023, 2022, because of COVID-19, of course, no one coming in. Again, dare I say, the criminality of the Morrison government locking Australians out of Australia. 40,000 of our fellow Australians were locked out. They burnt, their businesses were destroyed. They burnt their life savings. They wore out their welcome with friends and relatives wherever they were bunking down, to whichever country they'd been trapped.
Yeah. By the way, I was one of those people who were trapped in America. I mean, I went there willingly, but then in order to come back, I had to get the vaccine, and the health repercussions of that still continue for me. So it was not my choice. So many more in worse situations than me.
Well, all my business was abroad, and I was abroad. I was in Japan, and I got back thanks to Eugenie, my travel agent. She told me, I've rebooked your flights. I said, I don't want them. She said, I've rebooked them. You're coming back. And she got me back 5 days before the borders slammed shut.
Oh, wow.
So, but then again, so immigration. So Albanese has opened the floodgates, and by their own admission, they don't know how to shut them. They can't shut them. So we are going to stop mass immigration, or we're going to make the government, if we have the numbers in the Senate, immediately stop this mad mass immigration that's coming into Australia. If we're getting 500,000 a year under Albanese, we are building 100,000 houses a year. Now, probably, I don't know how many, but a good number of those houses will be for people who are going to move into them, people who are already here, Australians. So the actual available empty houses available for this 500,000 coming in, they don't exist. And yet, now, and so you wonder why there is a housing affordability crisis, why people can't afford to rent, why there is no rental accommodation available, why the queues outside every rental accommodation are huge. It's because of this. It's because of immigration. So One Nation's policy is to cap immigration at about 130,000 new arrivals a year, to control it so we make sure we are getting the trades, the professions, the people we want in Australia. Less than 1% of the new arrivals over the last 3 years are in the construction industry. Now, Albanese will claim, we're bringing in skilled trades. But what are those trades? Why aren't and according to the records, only less than 1% are in construction. So the cooks and the cleaners or whatever, they're not going to the construction industry.
So we don't have enough of Australian citizens who can take on those jobs?
We don't have enough tradesmen. Yes, there's a severe trades shortage in Australia. I'll come on to that in a moment. Okay. But so with our One Nation's immigration policy, 130,000. So that's half of the 260-odd thousand that was the average over the decade from 2009 to 2019. And then with the 220,000 approximately who leave Australia every year, we're going to have net negative immigration of 90,000.
Okay.
So we'll be bringing the numbers down who are actually here in Australia with controlled immigration, with the trades, the professions, the desirable immigrants that are here that are going to benefit Australia. And then the other thing too, we're going to absolutely stop immigration from extremist countries. So
Why would you do that? I don't understand. Why don't we want people here who want to kill us and destroy the freedom of choice that we have?
Why don't we?
I don't know.
Yes, we're not going to bring people in who hate Australia and who hate Australia's way of life, who hate our Judeo-Christian Western civilization and culture, who've left a different culture, presumably for a better way of life. And I will say unashamedly that for me, our Judeo-Christian Western civilization and culture is the greatest culture the world has ever known. It's given us everything. It's given the world everything it now enjoys in terms of its modernity. And that came from the scientific revolution. And that was a wonderful comment, a different approach to knowledge taken by a small group of Europeans. These are old, pale, stale, dead men.
God bless them.
Their statues being knocked down all over the world, I guess. by the woke and the progressives. A different approach to knowledge taken by a small group of Europeans has had profound consequences for the world. And then through the Renaissance and through the Reformation, through the Enlightenment, the development of technology, the development of science that really came out of the West. It started in Greece. The Greeks took the mathematics of Babylon and Egyptian and they turned postulates into proofs. I don't fully understand what I'm saying there because I'm not a mathematician, but my understanding is that with algebra and and Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, the Greek thinkers, which kick-started the development of the Judeo-Christian world. That moved into Israel, ancient Israel, into Rome, and then with the Roman Empire, and then the development, as I said, through the medieval age, and then into this Renaissance and this scientific revolution. And that has given the world everything we enjoy today in technology. Medicine, surgery, medical treatments, space travel, air travel, communications, the engineering, everything that everybody in the world enjoys. So this is the greatest culture the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
And that's why we have people emigrating here.
Yeah. Can I just say, I already know some people who are going to make a comment about some of the bad things that have happened under the Judeo-Christian principles. So the thing is, a principle might be good, a foundation of specific morality might be good, but the people may not do it well, right? So that's one thing I want to say. So it's not, there's nothing that is bulletproof, that is 100% proof that everything's going to go really well. Crusades, for example. Let's not even go there. And other things that we've done that is not necessarily the Aboriginal stolen children. Things like that.
Okay.
Oh, yes, talk about that. I'm not saying everything has been perfect, but what I do want to say is the Judeo-Christian standards are the best that I know of, that allow for freedom, that allow for thought, that allow for us to challenge each other, to kind of get our society better and better and better. It's never going to be 100%, but I have not yet found another one that works better, that is not bigoted, that doesn't oppress and suppress women, other men, any belief system. I haven't found another one yet, but yes, go ahead. I saw you making notes.
I mean, the first thing I'd say, you referred to the
stolen children.
Well, no, you referred to the Crusades.
Oh, yes.
Now, the Crusades were a response.
Oh, yes, you're right.
It was a response
yes.
to the Arab conquest of the Holy Lands that had been controlled by Christians from the 2nd, 3rd century, 1st century through to the Arab conquest.
Yes.
Or the Muslim conquest, rather. And then, of course, the Muslim in less than 50 years, the Muslims, superb soldiers, superb military achievements, conquered the whole of North Africa, and by 711, the century, or the year rather, not the shop, they were in Gibraltar and crossing into Spain and were conquering Spain. Okay. And in that century, they moved as far north as Poitiers in France, and that was in 732. When Charles Martel, I think Charles the Hammer, stopped the Muslim invasion of Europe and pushed them back. 732. So they got, there are a number of Poitiers in France, and it's a name that resonates with history. But then the Muslims would push back, and of course, this is what Osama bin Laden referred to as the tragedy of Andalusia, when they were pushed back right into Spain and finally pushed out of Spain by Ferdinand and Isabella in 1490 odd. And so the Crusades were a response. The Muslims went into Sicily. They really made a go of, and of course they were knocking on the doors of Vienna in 1683. So they really made a go of conquering Europe. And the Europeans in the First Crusade, right through to the Fifth Crusade, were responding to that. They weren't initiating.
No, I understand, but would you agree that their military strategy wasn't the best?
Oh,
they
could, yes. Well, they failed. Yes, and I mean, these are the fortunes of war.
Yeah.
And but that's
yes,
basically
absolutely.
history. And I mean, those are facts. And however you look at the Crusades, however you look at the Muslim conquests, facts are facts. And we have to address those facts. There can be an interpretation, but once the interpretation becomes otherworldly, it turns into, it goes into the realms of the absurd. With the stolen generation, this is a vexatious question. Now, I don't accept that there are stolen generations, that Aborigines were stolen.
Really?
Yes.
Teach me.
Keith Windshuttle. This was a term fabricated by an Australian historian. I think it was Henry Reynolds, who has been acclaimed as one of Australia's greatest historians. He's in his 80s now, and he lives in Tasmania. He was awarded Australian of the Year. I remember John Howard actually presenting him as Prime Minister, presenting him with his award. Now he, if I remember correctly, it was he who coined the term stolen generations. And he created this myth. Keith Windshuttle, again, another historian. Keith is a very interesting person. He used to be a Marxist as a student. I asked him why he was a Marxist. He's conservative now. He was the former editor of Quadrant magazine, just retired from that position. And he said, well, it's the follies of youth. I mean, he passed it off as the follies of youth and being at university. But he is a very, very well-known and credible historian. He's written a 2-volume work called The Fabrication of Aboriginal History. Now, that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it caused a furore here in Australia. Many people today have forgotten about it. When I asked them, have you heard of Keith Windshuttle? They haven't. Have you heard of his work on the fabrication of Aboriginal history? They haven't. Now, being the diligent historian he told me the way he came to this was as a student of history at New South Wales University. He read what he thought was a wonderful book written by a historian named Charles Rowley, and I've forgotten the actual name of the book, but it was something. It was the Black Armband History of Australia. It was the eradication of the Aboriginal race by the English settler, whatever it was.
Okay.
But it was all about this. It was a complete reversal of basically of history up to that point. He read it. He thought it was fantastic. It was the truth about white settlement and settler Aboriginal relations, which according to Rowley was just mayhem and murder and acquisition of land, until he checked the footnotes. Now, when he checked the footnotes, not only did he read them, but he went back to the original sources, and he found they were either falsified or they weren't primary sources, they were secondary sources, and being quoted with authority as primary sources, or they were taken out of context with perhaps ellipses in the quotation, so that a negative was turned into a positive, or a positive was turned into a negative. And that made him interested in this particular subject, and he ended up writing The Fabrication of Aboriginal History. In the first he's written volume 1 and 3. Now, I don't know how you write volume 2 without writing volume 2. The last time I saw him, he told me he'd retired from Quadrant magazine, and he was going to write volumes 2 and 4, and maybe volume 5. The first volume deals with basically Tasmania and the settlement of Tasmania. The third volume deals with the stolen generations. Now, he apologizes in the introduction to first volume for the number of footnotes that he's used. He's footnoted it to death, and he's gone to every primary source available. And he has provided the source, and he's quoted them correctly, as opposed to quoting them selectively or quoting them in a way that is misleading. And it's primary sources, not another 20th century historian who's made a comment and they end up quoting each other and going around in a circle of approving and agreeing with each other. On his count, about 8,000 Aboriginal children were taken away from their parents. The reason they were taken away was for their protection, because their parents were either alcoholics, they were in jail, The children were abandoned. There's only one Aboriginal Australian who has taken a case of being a stolen generation child to court and has won. That was a man named Bruce Trevorrow. He was about my age. Sadly, he's since passed away. He was found, aged a few months, on the side of a riverbank. His home was a shanty on the riverbank. His mother was in jail. His father was an alcoholic or drinking in town, or vice versa, but there was no parent there to care for him. He was in danger. He was covered in sores. He was malnourished, and he was in danger of rolling into the river and drowning. So he was picked up by caring people, and he was put up for adoption. And he was adopted by a Salvation Army family. And unfortunately, I don't know the circumstances of his upbringing. I would hope that with the Salvation Army family, it was kind and caring and loving. But he had a troubled childhood and then a troubled adulthood. And eventually, in his 40s or 50s, he took this case to court. And because the administration regarding his adoption had not been carried out properly, that is the only reason he won the case. Because the I's and the I's weren't dotted, the T's weren't crossed properly. No other claimant to be a stolen generation has succeeded. And in fact, Andrew Bolt has challenged the Aboriginal industry to name 10 stolen generation, and they haven't been able to provide him with those names. Now,
but what if they consider what we say, like children that are, taken for their own well-being and safety? What if they consider that a theft of a child?
Well, the child protection services are there for that, and more
back then.
Indeed, and more. I think more white children were taken away from their parents who weren't fit, who were unfit parents, for their protection. So it wasn't a race thing. It wasn't.
Oh, Warwick, this is blowing my mind.
It wasn't just Aboriginal children. I mean, there are. Look at the children in care today, in foster care. It's a complete kaleidoscope of color, if you like, skin color, if you want to go down that route. So it wasn't. And the claims that.
Oh my word.
Yes, and so but people won't accept this. Now, there was a wonderful woman named Lois O'Donoghue. I think she's passed away. She changed her name to Lowitja O'Donoghue, which I think is an Aboriginal name. And there is an annual Lowitja O'Donoghue oration, which is generally delivered by Prime Minister or a minister or a dignitary every year, and I presume it's about Aboriginal matters. Now, she claimed that she'd been stolen. She'd been stolen from her parents. Now, the reality was, which she admitted to, was that her mother was Aboriginal. I don't know whether she was a full 100% Aboriginal or 50% or whatever. Her father was an Irishman, and he was an itinerant stockman. She was born in the 1930s. He didn't have a permanent abode. His wife was either dead or in jail or had disappeared. He took his 3 daughters very responsibly to a Catholic mission and said to them, "I cannot look after my children. Would you please take them?" And of course, Christian missions were there exactly for that purpose, to provide welfare and to provide to look after people, whether they were babies, children, teenagers, adults, the elderly.
That was their purpose.
That was their purpose. And so they took in these 3 children. Now, she was educated. She became a nurse. She married. I think she had a happy life. She had children. And then later in life, she decided that when this stolen generation nonsense reared its head, this myth, she then decided that she'd been stolen. When it was pointed out to her, the circumstances of her arriving in the mission, it was, oh, okay then. And so there was a bit of backwards and forwards. And so I think it's claimed that 1/3 of Australian Aborigines are claiming that they were stolen, taken away from their parents, from their culture, from where they would have been properly nurtured and brought up.
But Warwick, my mind is blown. I'm so sorry. First of all, I want to read the book that you mentioned. Please don't leave here.
2 volumes.
Okay, don't leave here without giving me those details. And everything that is I believe as current Australians, we love our Aboriginal people. We love them. We want the best for them, and everything that we're trying to do is with the mindset of how can we right this wrong that was done. And if you're telling me the wrong wasn't done, and also I don't believe the way we're doing it is good. I think it's terrible. What we're doing is terrible. Just recently I heard of a beautiful young man who's still under 18, but at the age of 2, he went into foster care because of the abuse he was receiving in his own family. But these beautiful couple who are not Aboriginal took him in, and they're not allowed to adopt him, and he's almost 18.
Yes, I've heard that, yes.
He loves them. Yes. They love him. He's done well.
Well,
go ahead. Oh.
Well, I think this is symptomatic of what's wrong with Australia today. The progressives, the woke, they've developed this Aboriginal industry, and so these are the people behind the voice. And of course, these are people who've been properly, fully assimilated, integrated into Australian society. Now, it's all very well to say that, in fact, it's wrong that there was this idyllic, Edenic society that existed with, as Bruce Pascoe is claiming in his various books and so on, this supposed historian, that this was, a slight segue. Pascoe has claimed that Aborigines invented democracy, that there was no hunger in the whole of Australia because they had some kind of socialist collective that worked, that they built houses and they farmed and so on, and also that there was peace reigned in the land. Now, the historians contradict themselves in this regard. The reality is that they were a nomadic people. They were hunter-gatherers. They did a fantastic job of surviving in this Australian harsh landscape. Yes, so the industry, this Aboriginal industry, is being driven by people who are in our society. University professors, teachers, people who are fully assimilated, very much enjoy the electricity, the air conditioning, the air travel, the motor vehicles, communications, the medicines, the surgery that's made available to them. And so what is happening is the way we are dealing with them today. And so they are taking huge amounts of money, and it's not going where it's needed. Now, Senator Jacinta Numpajimpa Price, a Liberal national senator from the Northern Territory, is the most wonderful Aboriginal woman, I think, in Australia today. A true leader. She led the No. She was a voice of reason and led the No campaign to the Voice to Parliament.
Really?
Along with Warren Mundine, another Aboriginal. They both recognised it was divisive, it was racist, and it was going to privilege a small group of Australians by race, because of their race, over every other Australian in the country. And Jacinta Numpajimpa Price, Warren Mundine, everybody in One Nation believe that we are all fellow citizens. We all have equal rights. We believe in the dignity of each one of us as a human being, made in the image of God, which a lot of those who are secular don't accept and don't want to agree with. I say tough to that.
Yeah.
That is
nothing more unifying than that.
Well,
nothing.
And One Nation is one nation. I mean, we're not. It's not two nations or divided
fight
nations.
For each other. Yes,
it's one nation. Everybody equal before the law. Equal opportunity.
Yeah. Not
equal outcome, because we can't control that, and we all have different abilities and skills and so on. But
wow.
So. She knows where the need is, and it's in the remote townships that are being set up by people in the city who have this romantic vision of Aborigines living the way they used to, back on their land, and so on. But of course, they don't want to live that way. There was a wonderful quotation. Sadly, I lost the actual source, but around 1900, either a missionary or a squatter or a diarist wrote that the Aboriginal elders in a particular area were complaining at the fact that the young men in their tribe did not want to remain in the tribe, did not want to learn the law, Aboriginal law, L-O-R-E, i.e. the way of life and so on, or Aboriginal law, L-A-W. They much preferred to go into town and to adopt the Western, the settler, the modernity. They wanted to come into the modern world. And yet we have these Labour Party, the Greens, the progressives, the woke, who want to see Aborigines back in their supposedly idyllic, Edenic setting, and are working hard to do that. They are the ones who are causing the separation, who want to see the separation, and they are the ones who are keeping them down. Frankly, it's patronising and it's demeaning. Instead of seeing Aboriginal Australians as our brothers and sisters, our equals in every way across the law, they are trying to either put them on a pedestal with some romantic version of
segregation,
or the other, and that's being driven by those who claim to be Aboriginal. And I actually did a DNA test. I was hoping to find a sliver, a gene, something. Unfortunately not. But I am Aboriginal because this is the country where I was born and from which I came. From the origin, or ab origine, or the Latin. So this is what we have. And Jacinta Numpajimpa Price knows where the money should be going and how it should be delivered. Instead of going into the hands of the Aboriginal industry, where it is not shared, often the funds are not audited, and then you can see where it's the failures. And don't the progressives love to bring the failures out?
Yeah.
To say, look what we're doing to the original people who were here, and we need to throw more money at it. The answer to every problem for the progressives, for the Labour Party, for the Greens, is to chuck money at it. They don't even think about
money.
They don't even think about managing it properly. It's just, look how much we've spent. Well, show us the results. So, yes, so that's my take on the stolen generations.
Thank
It's
you.
a myth. And,
Wow.
And Keith Windschuttle, God bless him, has shown it. It's
every time I talk to you, I get another train of thought I've never had, and it makes me want to learn more about it. So this is why I love conversations with people we agree or disagree with, or just whatever it is. So we can kind of like, someone ignites another thought and we go and do our research and we learn more. We may come out thinking the same or not. Doesn't matter. I guess we get to just have conversations and learn more. I never knew that. I even studied Australian history at university because I loved it so much at school. Most people don't like it at school. I loved it. So I went to university. I still didn't learn that.
Well,
no one even hinted at that.
I also studied Australian history at university, and it was fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad I took it. Initially, I didn't want to. I thought I'd rather do global history or some hugely significant turn, French Revolution or the Crusades or whatever. I'm so glad I did it, because one of the things that we looked at was white settler Aboriginal relations. And again, so many fabrications that are being put out today by today's historians. There are probably two sorts of, Keith Windschuttle pointed this out, two sorts of historians, what he called the Orthodox school and the classical, I forget now the exact terminology, but the one group were perpetuated or created the black armband version of history, where the white settlers were criminals. A perfect example was the Keith Windschuttle was in a debate, a late line debate about 2001 with Henry Reynolds. Henry Reynolds was this historian, and Henry Reynolds was claiming at the time the frontier wars, the 20,000 Aboriginals had been killed heroically defending their country against the invading white settlers. Now, Keith Windschuttle challenged him on this and asked him where the numbers had come from. And he said, the evidence is there. It's out there. The native police were just going out killing and shooting and so on. But when Windschuttle challenged him and said, the only where you get your figures from is it was a book of essays that Reynolds had edited in the 1980s, and one of the essays he had contributed, and a footnote in that essay said that it was said that I think 800 whites had been killed, I think, in Queensland over a certain period of time, maybe a century, of obviously a conflict of different sorts. And it was 800 whites who'd been killed. The footnote said, no doubt, because 800 whites had been killed, 10 times the number of Aborigines were killed in retaliation. That was the footnote. And so suddenly we now have a figure of 8,000 that historians pick on and run with. In 2001, at the time of that late line debate, Reynolds was claiming that 20,000 Aborigines had been killed in these frontier conflicts. And these were challenged by Keith Windschuttle. And what Reynolds said, the evidence is in Queensland. Now, Keith Windschuttle made the point that for some reason, and it was the native police who were basically responsible. And of course, native police were Aborigines, and no doubt there were tribal issues. So any conflict that occurred between Aborigines might perhaps be related back to tribal warfare was rampant. Henry Reynolds admits this and has put a number of, I don't know whether he's invented it, I don't know how he found it, but he put a huge number of deaths attributed to tribal warfare, Aborigines fighting Aborigines. That's all brushed under the table. So now we have Henry Reynolds claiming that 20,000, it had jumped from the 8,000, or the extrapolation 10 times, supposition that 10 times had been killed, to 20,000 in 2001 in Queensland. Now, Reynolds said the evidence is there, and Windschuttle replied, there are no native police records in Queensland. For some reason, no one knows why, everyone agrees, in the 1930s, the records were burnt. They were destroyed. But in Victoria, the records exist and are very comprehensive, and they show that the native police in Victoria were a force for good. They stopped the depredations of the whites against the blacks, and they stopped the depredations of the blacks against the whites. So in Victoria, where you have primary sources, native police records, there was peace. In Queensland, where records don't exist, Reynolds is claiming there was mayhem and murder and so on. It doesn't follow. And then today, the claim today is that 100,000 Aborigines died in the frontier wars. This is complete fabrication. There are no records. And in 2016, two young historians made a presentation which Reynolds referred to as Fantastic Unearthing New Evidence. And the title of their presentation was, We Cannot Tell the Numbers. So they give it away straight in their presentation. They extrapolated on the flimsiest of nothing. They went from 20,000 in 2001 to 60,000 around that time, pulling numbers out of thin air. And then today it's 100,000, which is now supposedly accepted and punched out as reality. So history is being reinvented, it's being rewritten. And I studied this extensively, and I found it fascinating to see the massacre maps. Massacre maps have been produced by revisionist historians. And Susan Ryan at the University of Newcastle, I think, was one of the main proponents or originators of the massacre maps. Other historians have completely debunked these massacre maps. They're not saying that conflict didn't occur, but for example, in one of the conflicts, first of all, they're disputing the numbers of deaths because there are no records. Secondly, in one of the conflicts, a number of whites were killed. They were included in the Aboriginal deaths, in the numbers. So, I mean, it's not history. It's a complete revision of history. So 2 historians have debunked. They've said, we're not denying that conflict occurred. And of course, conflict always occurs in society. It's happening every day with Caucasian Australians fighting Caucasian Australians, or taking them to court, or Asian Australians or Aboriginal Australians fighting Aboriginal Australians. It's a fact of life. It's human nature.
Yeah.
It exists, and yet there's this complete fabrication which is trotted out.
Yeah.
And I had 2 friends of mine who were both well-educated, successful in business, and telling me exactly what you said, that you know, the way we've treated our Aboriginal Australians is damning and damaging. And they'd never heard of Keith Windshuttle. They'd never heard of any of the things. And I'm not making it up. The evidence is there. It's in the history books.
There's something...
and so One Nation, we're going to dismantle the Aboriginal industry. We're going to put it back onto the states, and we're going to make sure that the money goes where it's needed. And it is needed. Probably Jacinta Nampijinpa Price says that about 20% of Australia's Aboriginal population is in need of support and funding and so on. The other 80% live exactly like we do, in the cities, in the towns, and they've happily embraced modernity.
I'd love to talk to her. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
The thing I want to bring up at this point was, there's something strange in the children, or the great children, us, having to pay for the supposed wrong or the actual wrong of the many generations ago. I feel like if the pendulum has to swing both ways. If we're going to be blamed for something that was, let's say, quote unquote, was done back then, shouldn't they be blamed for things that their great-grandparents did to other people back then?
So who's they?
The Aboriginal people, for example. There's this idea, like, you know, us white people have to pay for what was done all those years ago. We didn't make those choices. If they were actually bad, which my mind is being blown right now, so I can't wait to go and do that research. So and then the number of people that did do good back then. Why aren't we getting... So it just doesn't make sense to me to, for example, tell my grandchildren or have someone else's grandchildren blamed for what their great-great-great-parents did. It doesn't make sense to me. I can't compute how this is a law, how this is a system, how it affects everything. I mean, I'm in the film industry, so even hiring someone who is of Aboriginal descent, there's so much we have to do as far as asking the elders permission to tell a story, or I'm like, wait a minute, why doesn't that individual have the choice, like the rest of us, to say, I want to make this story, I don't want to make this story, I want to perform in this, I don't, there's so much red tape, there's so much, and it's been, I'm sorry, but it's been disguised as respect for the culture. Well, I would much rather respect the person and give them the same rights as I have, and let them make a decision. Do you want to be in this film? Do you want to perform this? Do you want to tell this story? Is it a story you'd like to tell? Why do you have to ask permission from other people who apparently have rights over a story from such a long time ago? Anyway, I'm rambling now, but anyway, share your thoughts on that.
Well, I think I think we could probably lay the ills of the world back into the arms of the progressives, the woke, who are an extension of the progressives. I don't know what term will come after woke, but there will be one.
Yeah.
And so with the failure of Marxism in the Soviet Union, the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989, basically the failure of communism, although it does exist and there are still communists in the world. I don't know what they need to recognize failure. But certainly Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, made the phrase famous, the long march through the institutions. And that's the long march of the Marxists through the institutions. And those institutions could be the church, it's certainly government, the bureaucracy, the universities. And so what we have there with the failure of Marxism, they were enraged and they where could they turn their focus in order to maintain the rage, if you like, of the former Marxists against the capitalist system, against the West, and so on. And they looked at colonialism, which is the new, if you like, the new target. And so out of this came this crime of colonization, the resentment, and the attack on our Judeo-Christian Western culture is based on that. They're putting guilt on us. We have education is changing. I just saw recently that postgraduate students at, I think, Monash University in law, so they're postgraduate students, they have to write an essay on welcome to country or there's something, and if they don't get it right, they will fail.
Wow.
And this you're now bringing politics, like a political perspective, into academic studies. And this is the rot that we are going through in this country and in the West today, with the attack from within on our Judeo-Christian Western values, our culture, and civilization. And as I said, the one civilization, the one culture, the one set of values that gave the world everything that the world today enjoys, wherever they live in the world, whatever culture they live under, it is that culture, through the scientific revolution, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the development of technology, medicine, science, and law, and so on, that is, which makes everybody want to come and live in Australia or New Zealand, or the United States, or Great Britain, or Western Europe.
So I was born in Iran, but I was born after the revolution, where, just speech was not allowed, thought was not allowed. It was one way, and it was a very oppressive way, actually. And it's funny how being woke resembles that so much. And that's one of the reasons I've started this podcast. I never envisioned that I would start a podcast to try to help us have normal conversation again, conversation with people we agree with, we disagree with, new thoughts, new ideas. So I just wanted to ask you your thoughts on, this having open conversation and what the effect of this wokeness has. It's just crazy that the word woke is so misused, and it feels like woke means shut up.
It does. So these are attacks on our freedoms and our freedom of speech. Now, One Nation, we are proponents of freedom, and our freedoms are being eroded in various ways. So we have the language police who are now policing this. You can say this, you can't say that. Every day I wonder, where has this edict come from? And I can just imagine some fat old man sitting up in an attic in his singlet and underpants and punching out these orders.
Does it remind you of that book? Was it 1884? 1984.
Yes, yeah. And there's a very funny cartoon going around, George Orwell saying, look, I wrote this as a warning, not as an instruction manual. And it's being taken as an instruction manual. So One Nation, freedom of speech, it's a bedrock condition of our society, and it's being eroded. We're being told what we can say, even we're being told almost what to think. So people were being arrested for praying outside an abortion clinic. And how do you know you're praying? Okay, maybe they had their hands together, they were holding a cross, I don't know. But the controls, and then we had our freedom of movement, stopped unconstitutionally during COVID-19. A freedom of association was stopped during COVID-19. And they established these controls, and the people who remember the freedoms we had, people my age, or 10 or 15 years younger, 20 years younger, we are dying out. And then this generation coming through who are now being used perhaps to being controlled with the hate speech bills and the hate crimes bills and so on. We didn't have any of this 50 years ago. And I think we seem to truck along okay together.
Yeah.
There weren't any great ructions in society. And of course, this is just government interference. And it's the Greens, the woke, the progressives, the Labour Party, the left wing of the Labour Party. And I hold them responsible for this. And then this long march through the institutions and the capture of the institutions, I have to say. They've done a very successful job of it. And so, I mean, we have the ABC. You can't find a single conservative voice on the ABC.
Interesting.
A single conservative commentator, a single conservative, well-known presenter of a well-known program.
It's like the media's been hijacked.
I think
I
it
wonder.
has.
You shared a beautiful quote early on before we started about being able to have conversation.
Oh, free speech. Yeah, it's a wonderful quote. I got this from a newspaper, a reputable newspaper, and it was talking about offence. And I quote I quote first of all from the journalist. An offence is an inherent aspect of political communication and is often unavoidable. In fact, this is indicated by justices of the High Court. This is the High Court of Australia. This is evident in a leading free speech case known as Coleman versus Power, 2004, HCA 39, where the following is stated. So these are the High Court judges, or their judgment. From its earliest history, Australian politics has regularly included insult and emotion, calumny and invective in its armoury of persuasion. They are part and parcel of the struggle of ideas. Now, Pauline Hanson, an elected politician, made a reference to another politician with regard to whether they were happy or not in Australia, and perhaps they might be happier returning from whence they came, and was found against in a court. She's appealing that. She's appealing that judgment. But the High Court has authorised exactly what she said, and what is said in Parliament should be said outside, because Parliament is I understand there is a thing called parliamentary privilege, where one person may defame another person and escape the defamation rules. That's parliamentary privilege. And I think that serves a purpose, because that brings out things that might not be said for fear of being charged with defamation, and so on. So, but this is it. They are part and parcel of the struggle of ideas. That was, let me quote that, because I don't want to be accused of plagiarism. Minnie Jackson, writing in Spectator Australia in February 2025, and her article was called "Hate Crimes, a New Woke Attack Against Free Speech." So, Minnie, thank you for educating me.
Thank you, Minnie.
And bringing that out to the people of Australia.
I'd love to do an episode on the welcome to country. I heard it said recently, I don't need to be welcome to my own country each time I go into a meeting. And I thought, oh, that's so true. I'm still trying to get my head around this whole welcome to country everywhere we go. It's so insulting. And I want to know, I want to kind of think deeper and learn more about it, so that I know whether I'm wrongly insulted or really insulted. Well, it's just, I find it so irritating.
Well, it's invented Aboriginal culture. So apparently the first welcome to country was inaugurated by Ernie Dingo. Do you know Ernie Dingo? Yeah, Ernie Dingo, fantastic Australian comedian, and very, very funny. And I've seen in the past skits against Australian Aboriginals that were done by him. Probably wouldn't be allowed today. This was, I think, in the 1980s, 1990s. And he was very funny. Yeah. But apparently a Pacific Island football team came to Australia, and they did some kind of ceremony, a little bit like the haka, but it was also some kind of welcome to country. And Ernie said that we need to reciprocate. And that apparently is where the first welcome to country by an Aboriginal, or how it arose.
For people who weren't Australians?
Well, that was done in the 1980s. But the point I'm making is it was not an original, it's not a 60,000-year-old tradition. Or 50,000 or 20,000.
Well, can I just get clarification? They did that for people who are visiting Australia, or Australians?
Yes, so they were welcoming them to Australia.
That makes sense. That's fine.
Well, yes, but except it then became this this Aboriginal culture thing.
Yeah.
And that's how it's reported, that it originated with Ernie Dingo. I think he's older than I am. A little bit older than I am, but basically my generation. So, and it was done in the 1980s, 1990s. So,
wow,
it's invented culture, and it's romantic. I mean, there was a wonderful book put out called "Romancing the Primitive," and it's about this. It's about this need to. Well, I think Rousseau started it with the noble savage idea, that somehow. The North American Indians were living in an idyllic paradise before the Europeans arrived in the early 17th century,
wow,
or before that, in fact, 1494. Columbus. So 1492, Columbus hit the New World, and that was the beginning of colonization. And there was this, and it was Rousseau's noble savage, and from that has come all of these things. So even this terminology, First Nations, that's been borrowed from the North American.
No way.
North American Indians.
Warwick, every time I talk, this is the second time I've spoken to you. You like what I really enjoy with you is you make politics very easy for me to digest, but also you've had such a wide range of life and experience outside of politics. And I know for me and a lot of Australians, we really enjoy a politician who has had a life outside of politics, because then they have that human experience, then they have that lived life experience that they can bring to the table.
Well, exactly. And Pauline Hanson is a perfect example of a politician. Malcolm Roberts too, our two One Nation senators who have lived outside the political bubble. Pauline was mocked when she first came into politics as owner of a fish and chip shop. That's a small business. And when you think about it, it's a complicated small business, because every day she has to buy produce, she has to buy fresh fish, vegetables, potatoes, the oil that goes into the cooking. She then has to be involved with her staff, train her staff. She has to run that business at a profit rather than a loss, because the country is running at a loss at the moment, but we're not going out of business yet. If she ran her business at a loss, she would soon be out of business. She has to deal with, she's got a trifecta, I don't know, quinella, whatever you call it, of dealing with the customers. So employing her staff, training her staff, dealing with the customers, making a profit. Also, if you look at her history, she's also set up roofing and plumbing businesses. She's bought out a partner, which means dealing with the bank. Pauline Hanson has lived the small business, the entrepreneurial life, which is what we need in Parliament with that kind of experience. If you look at the front, I did this. I looked at the front bench of the last Labor government in 1949, before we had 23 years of Liberal coalition government up to 1972. Ben Chifley's front bench. I looked at Menzies' front bench around that time. I then looked at Morrison's front bench and Albanese's front bench. The differences, the contrast was so stark, black and white. Chifley's front bench, Menzies' front bench comprised drovers, blacksmiths, engine drivers. Ben Chifley was an engine driver, tradesmen, professional boxers, prisoners of war. Now, obviously, they'd had that experience because of the Second World War. The same with Menzies front bench. Farmers, graziers, which I think is an upmarket term for a farmer, and then pastoralists or whatever, accountants, dentists, doctors, but again, tradesmen and prisoners of war. So you had these men who had real life experience, boundary riders, going around the boundaries of these huge cattle stations. Just they go off for weeks at a time, making sure the fences were okay, checking the fences. And then you looked at Morrison's front bench and Albanese's front bench, and not a single one of them has had the calloused hands of a manual worker, not even in the Labour Party. I think there was one tradesman who got out of a trade fairly quickly and went into tech, teaching at tech.
Right.
Otherwise, most of them have come out of university, they've gone straight into a politician's office as a staffer, and then they've gone into a seat. They've never, I'd say most of them have never had what I call a proper job, and that's having to make a living, having to be successful, otherwise you lose your job. The only success they need is to win the next election.
Yeah.
And then, and so the contrast between Chifley's front bench and Menzies' last front bench, and then Albert Morrison and Albanese's was stark. No life experience. They don't know how the rest of Australia lives and the trials and tribulations that the rest of Australians have to go through. And particularly today, the trials and tribulations, the unnecessary trials and tribulations inflicted on the Australian people by the Labour Party, Albanese's Labour Party and the Greens. Albanese, a perfect example. I think he worked 1 year in a bank after he achieved his economics degree, been in politics all his life. Hasn't he done well out of it? He had a property portfolio that every other Australian would love to have, and now he's bought a $4 million retirement home on the coast that again would be every Australian's great Australian
Working
dream.
in public office.
All he's done, all he has, his whole life, he has been a politician. And, dare I say, our Prime Minister is paid more than the President of the United States, than the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, I think than the Chancellor of Germany. Our ministers are paid more. The Chief of our Defence Force, the CDF, is paid 2 or 3 times more than his American counterpart, who has an armed forces, men, materiel, women, 20 or 30 times larger. Our bureaucrats are paid far more than bureaucrats around the world. We have 31 civil servants who earn more than $1 million a year. They earn more than the Prime Minister. And yet, do they deliver? I would say no. So this is the elite class that we have.
Do you think they should be paid less, or are you saying that they should be doing more for what they're paid?
Well,
which one of those two are you saying?
Well, if they delivered, we wouldn't be looking at what they're paid. I mean, and who knows? I mean, the majority of people don't know that we've got 31 bureaucrats running departments who are paid more than $1 million a year.
Yeah.
And the Prime Minister's paid about $550,000 a year. I don't begrudge him that, but certainly hasn't Albanese done well out of politics? And don't most of our senior politicians in the major parties do well out of politics? So that's that's a thought there. But with One Nation, we have a plan. We're taking to this election. We have policies that have taken us a good number of years to develop and to cost. And so, as I said, we're going to cut $90 billion worth of waste from government expenditure, which is just pure waste, and also duplication of services that rightly belong with the states. We're going to put $40 billion back into the pockets of taxpayers. We're going to bring down the cost of housing, bring down the cost of energy, housing costs. Did you know that up to $576,000 of government taxes, regulatory costs, and infrastructure costs, that's what it can cost you before you even lay a single brick in your land and housing package. It varies. It's about $300,000 or $400,000, up to $300,000 or $400,000, depending on where you're doing this, of course, in Victoria, and a similar number in. But I think New South Wales is the most expensive, up to $576,000. Did you know that for every new home, you have to make it NDIS compliant and wheelchair compliant? That adds $49,000, at least $49,000 to the cost of a new home.
I didn't know that.
It's unnecessary. It's government telling you how to spend your money, how to build your home, how to design your home. This is just interference, unnecessary interference. And you know, are we truly a nation of disabled that we need every new house to have be NDIS compliant and wheelchair compliant? So these are examples of government interference and government waste, which is inflicted upon the people, upon us. The other thing that we have in our policies is we're going to build infrastructure. So this comprises finishing the Inland Rail project. We're going to connect Perth to every other Australian major capital city. We're going to connect Geraldton to Port Hedland. That's about 1,100 miles of coast, basically the coast of Western Australia. And then we're going to connect Port Hedland, 1,100 kilometres, Geraldton to Port Hedland. And then we're going to connect Port Hedland to Moranbah, which is in central Queensland. It's 200 or 300 kilometres outside Rockhampton, sitting on a coal field. We're going to bring the iron ore from Port Hedland across the continent to Geraldton. We're going to rebuild steelworks in Moranbah in Queensland, and then that steel will be transported by our plan to fully develop the Inland Rail system, but that will go to Newcastle, to Port Kembla in Wollongong, and down to Whyalla in South Australia, into the rolling mills, again to develop our steel industry and to rebuild that and to use the resources we have, the coal we have, to make our own steel and to keep our coal miners in work. And then the Inland Rail, we're going to connect the Shepparton, the Tocumwal, which is in northern Victoria, line through to Hay in southern New South Wales. Shepparton, the Goulburn Valley, it's the food bowl of Victoria, and we're going to send that food produce throughout Australia, and then connect Melbourne to Brisbane so that we can bring the products there. The two major ports, Melbourne and Brisbane, bypassing Sydney. Sydney is no longer a port. And then also rail projects in Queensland to connect the food bowl, Garden of Eden in Queensland with the rest of Australia and the rest of the world.
This is amazing.
Back into Gladstone in Queensland as a port for export. We're going to build dams. We're going to build dams in northern Queensland. We're going to build dams in Victoria. The Buffalo Dam in Victoria, the Urana project in Queensland, and other dams in Queensland. Now, one interesting dam project, which is a state responsibility, and that is raising the Warragamba Dam wall. The Liberal National State New South Wales government had a project to raise the dam wall. The objective was flood prevention, flood mitigation of the Hawkesbury Nepean Valley. Now, as well as the Warragamba Dam provides 80% of Sydney's water supply, and so with Sydney's population growing through unlimited immigration, we're going to need more water. And so raising the dam 14 metres it was called a state strategic state infrastructure, SSI. And that was the proposal. Needless to say, it was blocked by ratbag environmental activists and the fanatical Greens. And so it went then through to the Minns government, and both governments, the Liberal National and the Minns government, have shelved the plan because, I don't know, a free-eyed newt that had been discovered somewhere, an Aboriginal campfire that is now of archaeological significance. The environmental issues outweigh the prevention of flooding or the mitigation of flooding. Now, 140,000 of our fellow Australians live in the Hawkesbury-Nepean Valley. So in place of building a dam wall, raising a dam wall rather, a mere 14 metres to prevent or mitigate flooding, guess what the governments are going to do? The geniuses have worked out they're going to improve the roads and they're going to develop an evacuation plan so those 140,000 people can be evacuated quickly. Guess what? Their homes, their businesses will go underwater. They will be destroyed.
You have got to be kidding me.
And then those 140,000 they will have fled, and they will now be competing for non-existent housing. And I guess Albanese might give them a $300 voucher to help them start again.
Wow.
How generous. So these are governments, Liberal national state government, Labor state government, who have put ideology before people and who really don't care about 140,000 of our fellow citizens. We heard Albanese bleating about the destruction of Cyclone Alfred in Queensland and the mayhem that caused. That can't be controlled, of course. But this can be controlled, and yet those 140,000 fellow Australians have been abandoned.
Yeah.
And so that's outside the One Nation will promote the raising of that wall for those reasons.
Yeah.
We put Australians before ideology, before everything else.
Yeah.
Unlike Labor and the Greens.
I want to ask you about this potential new law that's going to be coming in where it's going to enforce every single hospital in Australia to perform abortion. It seems that there might be a law that's going to pass, and it's not going to allow hospitals that don't believe in performing abortions, therefore have the right not to do it, so people can go to places that do perform abortions. But there's a law that's going to be passed. So this is going to mean doctors and nurses are going to be out of work. Hospitals are going to have to close because it is their moral stance that we don't perform abortions. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And is that something One Nation has a view on?
Indeed, we do.
Yeah?
It's an outrageous attack on personal freedom and freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, and freedom of association, and so on. It's an erosion, this chipping away of our personal freedoms, of our political freedoms, and so on. And so, with regard to abortion, we have what we call a pro-life policy. We believe that life begins in the womb, that at conception, and that it is a human being. And I'm not against abortion, and neither is One Nation under the right circumstances. So up to, 15, 16 weeks gestation, perhaps, and for medical reasons, whether it's because the fetus is unviable and there's no point in it going to term, or whether it's for the safety, the life of the mother. Of course, there are pro-life people, I would call them extreme in their views, and I don't mean that in an insulting sense at all, but under no circumstance, they believe that under no circumstances should abortions occur. I don't prescribe to that, and neither does One Nation. And then also we believe in our pro-life policy, we are stating that every newborn in Australia has a right to immediate medical care. Now, what we are having from the hating and hateful Greens and the left wing of the Labor Party, and indeed some members of the Liberal Party, at least 4 senators who voted against a bill that was put out exactly for this, to every newborn was to be, basically what it was, any newborn who survived an abortion was to be provided medical care and in order to survive. Because what is happening now in Queensland has been brought out by a whistleblower midwife up there, is newborns who were aborted almost at full term and survived are being put aside and left to die, which is it's inhumane, it's murder. If you then talk to these progressives, you look at it from a philosophical point of view, they will argue that a newborn hasn't attained personhood, a philosophical term. They're not, in other words, they're not persons for various reasons, lack of self-awareness, lack of ability to survive, take care of themselves, consciousness, and so on. It's absurd. And they pick arbitrary figures. One Australian philosopher, I think teaching in the United States, has argued that a newborn is not a person until about 1 month of it. I mean, 1 month. Why not 3 months? Or where does he pull this arbitrary number out from? And why is he the authority on this? So, first of all, that's our policy, that every newborn in Australia, whatever the circumstances of their birth, whether they come to term naturally and born naturally, or whether they, in fact, were aborted, which is outrageous at full term, they must be afforded full medical care and kept alive. We also have in that pro-life policy that doctors and nurses, medical workers will not be forced to act against their conscience. This is 1984, and it's absolute erosion of our liberties, civil liberties, our political liberties, our right to a conscience. And I would say that these people, they are inhumane. They don't have a conscience, and they're utterly repellent.
Yeah. This is going to be one of the ones where you and I have such a big disagreement, and I still respect you highly. And this is the one for abortion. I believe in zero reasons to abort a child.
I accept your
and that's fine.
Your right to have that point
Absolutely. I believe it should be made illegal, completely illegal, for people to go and have an abortion. A lot of times when they say things, what if in the circumstance of like it's the mother's life or the child's life, there's been so many accounts of, I don't want to dispute it and dismiss it completely that there are circumstances like that, but there's been so many circumstances where doctors have said that to a mother and the mother's like, no, I'm going to deliver my baby, and both of them are fine. 100% fine. So many of those circumstances. And then you talk about the very minority and disgusting circumstances of incest or rape or assault. And I would still say to that we've been fed the lie that the child must suffer. I don't believe that. The child will be your hope, your child will be your answer, the child will be your freedom, the child will be all of those things. And because we've been fed the lie that the child is the product of someone disgusting, as opposed to the other half, which is someone wonderful, someone who was innocent. So for me, I have a whole other view, but I also don't want to take away the freedom. I don't want this law taking away the freedom of people who are saying it's against my moral stance as a nurse, as a doctor. This is not, I am here, I do this because I want to help life bloom. I don't want to take away life. I don't want that. I definitely don't want that. But so I appreciate you sharing where your stand is.
I mean, as always, there are contradictions, and I don't like contradictions. If I'm contradictory or inconsistent in my thinking, I might not appreciate it being pointed out to me, but I will accept it because I don't want to be contradictory. So the contradictions with babies being aborted at full term and then being left to die instead of being given to a charity for fostering for adoption. The contradiction is when a baby is found abandoned on a rubbish tip or on the steps of a hospital. Immediately it's picked up, it's cherished, it's warmed up, it's fed, it's put in an incubator. The message goes out to the mother who obviously didn't want it, that please come in, we're concerned about your welfare, your health, you will not be in trouble.
Absolutely.
What is the difference? That mother didn't want the baby. That mother abandoned the baby when it was born. Why is there a difference between that child, that baby, and the baby that is delivered in a hospital and yet put aside to die? The inconsistency is glaring.
Yeah, absolutely.
The contradiction is glaring.
Yep. Well, Warwick, thank you so much. Are there any last words you want to share?
Yes, I would like to say that obviously I appreciate being invited here. It was very interesting talking about these various topics, but an election is coming up, and I would like to exhort your listeners, your viewers, to think about their vote, and to, if they're not happy with the way Australia is going at the moment, then, and you want things to change, then you need to change the way you vote. And if One Nation has enough senators in the upper house and members in the lower house, then we will be able to force change. As I said, we will stop the worst excesses of a possibly returned Albanese government propped up by the Greens. We'll stop any divisive and destructive legislation they might try to push through. And if it's a Dutton coalition government, however that might be supported, then we will be supporting it by propping it up, putting political spine into those in his party who should probably properly be in the Labor Party, and putting political courage, political integrity into them, and stopping this headlong rush over a financial and economic and social cliff. We've lost our social cohesion. We've lost our economic advantage in the world with our cheapest, lowest energy prices, and we have lost our food production. 98% of our vegetables are produced in Australia for domestic consumption. A third of our vegetable growers are talking about leaving the industry because of rising, crippling energy costs. I say to Albo and Adam Band, where do you think our food is going to come from? And they don't think. They don't even care. They're just driven by ideology. So for lower energy prices, for affordable housing, for a stop to this mass immigration, and for also looking at crime and where that's coming from, please vote One Nation.
Absolutely. And actually, before you go, I'm going to say something that I think I touched on the first podcast that we did on the One Nation platform. I was under the impression, because of what I was being fed by the media, that One Nation is very bigoted and racist. And only when I saw Miss Hanson being physically assaulted and things thrown at her is when I went back. I just stepped back and I thought, wait, why are they behaving this way towards someone? Like, what is it that she stands for that's so horrible? So I went and looked into what One Nation stood for, and I could not believe how inclusive, how uniting the policies were, the stance of One Nation was. And I'm really sad and sorry that I wasted those years misunderstanding and not knowing. And I just want to really encourage everyone to go and find out what One Nation truly stands for, not what the lies that we have been fed and the information that has been blocked from us. So I really appreciate you coming here. I really appreciate you guys and Miss Hanson working so hard to keep at it, to try to make us one united community. And I really love and appreciate that it's not a bigoted stance. It's definitely not an exclusive stance. It's very, very inclusive and appreciative of a variety of cultures coming and embracing our Australian culture. And
we have an Aboriginal candidate standing in New South Wales in the lower house. We have non-Caucasians standing in other states. Yeah. So these are just throwaway lines that our enemies thoughtlessly throw out there. I was told by a neighbour that One Nation is irrational. And when I said, please explain, there was no explanation. These are just throwaway, these are lazy, cliched, throwaway lines. Yeah. And people say them in the kind of way that, having said it, that stops all debate. I don't need to go any further. I'm on the high moral ground. Yes. You're way down in the gutter, and I won't even talk to you. Yeah. And it's cheap, it's lazy, and it's ridiculous.
Yes. Well, Warwick Stacey, please come back. There's so many other things I'd love to hear from you. You are a man who has experienced so much in life. You're very fascinating to listen to. Next time you come, let's talk about Lawrence of Arabia. You touched on that last time. Yeah, that was fascinating. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Janet, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.